Hello and welcome to another episode of the PropSwap podcast. We are your hosts, Ian Epstein.
And Luke Pergande.
And we are also the founders of PropSwap, the first marketplace to buy and sell sports bets. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We've got another great episode for you. We will get into some big sales since we last spoke, including some hockey, some NBA, and some college basketball. But first, I thought we would go into a little kind of industry news. A lot has been happening with the situation, Luke, and I thought it was kind of finally time to talk about it. And it is involving the DFS Pick Em industry and the recent crackdown by some of these states. So just for the listeners who are not familiar, I'm going to give a little breakdown of what's been happening. So first of all, just so you're aware, DFS Pick Em are basically against the house contests where users select two or more players from any given sport to go basically over or under a given stat. So, you could say Jalen Brunson over 25.5 points and Jason Tatum under 31.5 points. And you can add more than two legs, and the more legs you add, the higher your payout is. But it is unlike traditional DFS, that we saw kind of blow up in the mid 2010s, where it was like a pool of people, right? So, some small pools, some large pools where you could win like $1 million and it was you versus other people. One of the big differences with this is that it's one user versus the company, right? And there are fixed odds based on how many selections you add to your entry. So needless to say, so I should say, so Prize Picks, Underdog, and Better are the three biggest companies in the space, but there are many other companies who are doing this as well. The issue at hand is the question of, is this fantasy or is this betting? In recent months, these companies have come under scrutiny from different state regulators and lawmakers. Nearly a dozen have sent these companies cease and desist letters, most notably so far New York and Florida. In New York, Prize Picks agreed to pay a $15 million fine to the state and cease operations there. Just for some context, I'm trying to put this like kind of this fine amount into context. Back in 2014, Cantor Gaming, which was at the time the largest sports book in Nevada, at the time when sports betting was only legal in Nevada, Cantor Gaming paid a $5.5 million fine to the state of Nevada for accepting illegal bets. And that was a record at the time. So granted, that was 10 years ago, but a $5.5 million fine was a record in the state of Nevada. And now in 2024, Prize Picks is paying triple that. While they haven't taken any action yet, California and Massachusetts have both said they are considering taking action on the companies. So I'm just going to stop there and just ask you, Luke, like, how did we get here? This is not exactly been an overnight sensation, at least not for me and you and anyone else who's been following this. But it seems like over the last couple months, it has been a snowball effect. And now we are at a point in time where it seems like these companies are really coming under the gun by some of these states.
Yeah. So, I'll answer the overview question first. Just how did we get here? I think regulators are like lemmings. They follow each other. Mostly. It's not a perfect rule, but a lot of the time they follow each other. We saw this story in 2015 with DraftKings and FanDuel, where Eric Schneiderman, the then AG of New York, he, of course, lost his job due to some sexual harassment, abuse allegations. But at the time, he was the Attorney General of New York, and he threw the book at DraftKings and FanDuel, basically saying, get out of my state. And then I think after the fact, they came up with a fantasy license for running those businesses in the state of New York. But at the time, Eric Schneiderman was number one, was AG number one. And then pretty much same thing happened. I think it totaled at 30 states told them to get out or sent them cease and desist. So it just takes one. We've been hearing about this at conferences for about a year, maybe even a little bit longer than that. So this isn't shocking at all to us, but we're insiders. The public doesn't have information like that. So yeah, these regulators are like lemmings. We run a startup that's kind of in the gray area, so I'm always cheering for the upstart. I want innovation to happen. We certainly, from an Uber and Airbnb perspective, when we lived in Nevada, that was ground zero for Uber. And you and I lived in Nevada. You couldn't use Uber for forever because the taxi lobbyists just pushed so hard to keep them out of the state. And it was bad for the consumer. It was expensive and can charge $3 for rides, and it was just a terrible experience for the resident. And in this situation, look, it's a cool product. Like I'm cheering for the upstarts. I want the New York City kids to be able to use this, but I just feel like regulators are like lemmings. The big guys are pushing this. Make no mistake, DraftKings and FanDuel are pushing against this because they're losing. There was a month I heard in the state of Michigan where Prize Picks made more money than DraftKings did. So the big guys are upset about it, and there's no doubt about it. They're hiring lobbyists as well to push back, which makes this more difficult. DraftKings and FanDuel lobbied to get their businesses legal in 2015, but there really wasn't anyone pushing back against that. It was just regulators. In this situation, you got the regulators and DraftKings and FanDuel seemingly on the same side, and that could be costly.
Yeah. So I was going to kind of draw some parallels between this situation and what happened back in 2016 with FanDuel and DraftKings, like you just brought up. Back then, I remember me and you, and I think the traditional thought was that one of the reasons, and maybe the main reason why FanDuel and DraftKings ended up getting so much blowback was due to the marketing and advertising by those companies. I mean, you could not turn on any channel without seeing a FanDuel or DraftKings and commercial, and they'd be running back to backs, and in some cases, and that definitely kind of caught the eye. I don't have any
real quick on that. My favorite stat about that time period was they were advertising more than Anheuser-Busch advertises. DraftKings was spending more money on an NFL Sunday than Anheuser-Busch, which is like that's a beer company that's been around for 200 years, and you're beating them out as DraftKings started like 3 years prior to that. I mean, it was bananas.
Yeah. Just to reiterate, the caveat being on an NFL Sunday, probably not overall, but yeah, on the NFL Sunday. And so I don't have any cool stats like that in regards to Prize Picks and Underdog and their advertising, but it does seem like it's a lot. I mean, all over TNT on a Thursday, hear it on the radio, listen to Monday Night Football on the radio, hear it. I mean, and that's just anecdotally just a couple things. And so I was going to ask, like, do you think it's more, if there was a pie in terms of what has brought this attention, do you think it's the FanDuel and DraftKings lobbying against them right now because they're beating them in some states? Or again, is it almost like too much advertising, and that's that catches the eye of one regulator, and then it snowballs from there?
Again, back to the conference thing, like we knew this was coming at least 6 months ago. I remember back in Denver in June, it was a very hot topic at a conference I attended out there. So I think this was put on the regulators' radar by DraftKings and FanDuel, and now the regulators are sitting on their couch on an NFL Sunday or a NBA Tuesday night, whatever it is, and they're seeing all the Prize Picks and Underdog ads, and now it's like, wow, like we better do something about this.
Yeah.
One last point about the fine. So you said the Cantor Gaming fine was in 2014.
Yeah.
So I did an inflation calculator. Let's just see what $1 from 2014 to 2024 would be. It's about a 30% increase. So a $5.5 million fine would be like $7 million. So we're double. Inflation aside, we're double the fine that New York just basically fined Prize Picks. I mean, Prize Picks settled. Like clearly the number must have been higher than 15. Prize Picks settled at 15 and said, "Hey, we'll pay you $15 million to stop this lawsuit." And yeah, so pretty.
That was $15 million was the amount that Prize Picks was like, all right, yeah, we're comfortable paying that. And it was, didn't really give any specifics, but they said that that $15 million number was a function of the revenue that Prize Picks had made over the last like 3 years, basically accusing them of operating without a license. And so, yeah, I mean, it's maybe we can get into whether or not we think this is sports betting or not sports betting, because at the end of the day, I mean, yes, it is extremely ironic that the companies that were pushing the envelope in 2016 and, basically, called out a lot of these AGs and regulators for stifling innovation are now basically doing the thing that they hated. But on the other hand, it's like, well, in New York, for example, you have to pay an exorbitant license fee. You got to pay these crazy tax rates as a sportsbook operator, but those don't go for DFS. And so, look, I'll just say this. In my opinion, I kind of was a little anti DFS at the time in 2016, because all it is they are trying to exploit a one sentence or a couple sentence rule that was passed in like the mid aughts, and it's just like they just
the mid what?
Like the mid 2000s, like the mid, it was like in 2006, that talked about, fantasy being exempt from sports betting. And, there were certain rules laid out there at the time, right? Like it had to have a prize pool. It had to have a fixed prize pool. It had to involve players from multiple games. And, the idea was just like buddies playing season-long fantasy football with their friends. And then FanDuel and DraftKings explored that a little, by instead of being a season long, it was one day. And then, I think these companies like Prize Picks and Underdog are exploiting that even further by it being against the house. And it's, it's not, fantasy is supposed to be you versus other people. And that's not what this is. And so I kind of do see it from, if you were to strip the names of FanDuel and DraftKings off and just said sportsbook operators are lobbying against these companies, I can kind of see it because they're having to pay costs that the DFS companies are not. And so, I guess my last question would be, do you think there is a path forward for these companies to remain in the fantasy space, or are they going to end up having to pull out of every state that deems them sports betting?
Yeah, we've talked about this on a prior episode. The best answer I had to that question is what Colorado's doing and make it based on fantasy points. And I was going to ask this before. You mentioned at the onset, Brunson and, Jaylen Brown, you have to pick two. Can you also not pick one? Can I not log on to Prize Picks and pick one prop? Can I just bet Brunson over 25 points?
No, it's got to be two or more.
Right.
And so basically which you could make the analogy that's parlays. And right. So, I believe, I'm not 100% confident, but I believe like the payout is if you make two picks, you get 2-to-1 odds on your money, right? So if you make two picks to your entry, and you bet $20, you can win 40. Now at the sports book, a 2-pick parlay is plus 260. So it's actually not even that good of odds compared to a parlay at the sports book. And then the other thing I would say is, I gave an example of over under points for a game, but it can get way more granular than that. Like it can get like, yes, no, a run in the first inning, right? Which is a very popular bet the sports book. You can do over under first quarter points. You can get super granular with some of these contest entries. You mentioned Colorado just quickly. Here are the Colorado fantasy rules. You must pick at least 4 players. And selections are limited to over under on the players' projected fantasy scores. So, that basically would include, for basketball's sake, like points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals, right? It's not just one stat category. It combines all of them. Just a couple other kind of notes I was going to add in here. Georgia introduced a sports betting bill the other week that has specific language for these DFS Pick 'em games, but it comes with a $100,000 application fee and a $1 million annual license, which is not cheap, but so Prize Picks, I should mention, is headquartered in Atlanta, and you got to believe that they were very integral in coming up with that language. So, there is a potential path forward here where something like this, where again, it's fantasy, fantasy is separate from sports betting. It lays out these kind of versus the house pick 'em games, but they start paying a little more than they currently are. But just the last thing, and I think this is something that's extremely important when talking about this industry. I've talked about Prize Picks and Underdog and Better. Those are three very successful, well-backed companies. But there are some companies in this industry who are not like that because these are house-backed games. Some companies are. There's been reports allegedly that some companies are withholding funds from customers because they are basically winning too much, right? Like I read one story where basically a guy admitted that he played a golf pick'em game and he was able to pick things that were correlated, which sports books will block you. The big DFS companies, they know to block you, but some of these other smaller guys did not have that built into their technology, and so he created like a correlated golf parlay that won for a lot of money. And again, it's not coming from another user who entered; it's come from the company. And if you don't have the funding, you can be like, "Oh crap, we don't have the money for you," or another company, there was reports that they basically were withholding someone's money in their account because like the line was they were winning more than like the average user, right? And so they called fantasy a game of skill. So it's kind of hard to say, oh, it's a game of skill, but yet be shut down for winning too much, which again is what you see in the sports betting. So I do think that's an important thing here.
Yeah.
And there's just way less. There's just way less, and there's way less oversight from a regulator standpoint on these DFS companies. And so, so kind of consumers should be wary of that if they win too much. So I'm sure there will be more to come on this story. It's super interesting, and so I think it's time we move on to some of the sales that we've been having. I think it's time to talk hockey. We have not talked a whole lot of hockey so far this season, and as the regular season starts to kind of come down to the end, we are starting to see some bigger and bigger sales, especially on the division winner side of things. So the Canucks have been an interesting team here on PropSwap. In early January, a customer placed a $3,000 bet on the Canucks to win the Pacific Division at plus 240 odds. Last week, he sold that ticket on PropSwap for $6,120. Those are odds of minus 150 for the buyer. And at the time, the Canucks were minus 190 at sportsbooks. So buyer got better odds than the sportsbooks were offering at the time. Today, the Canucks are now minus 270 to win the Pacific. And so as our resident hockey expert on the podcast, I'll ask you, what your thoughts on the Canucks chances are and about the sale.
Yeah. Before I get to that, quite a night in Chicago. Just brief hockey tidbit. I'll answer that question, of course, but brief hockey tidbit. Chris Chelios, who is arguably the greatest American-born defenseman of all time. I think he won 3 Norris trophies. They retired his jersey on Sunday night at the United Center. And on the same night, it was Patrick Kane night because Patrick Kane, of course, drafted by the Blackhawks, 1 overall, won 3 Stanley Cups here, played here for like 13 years, is now in the Red Wings, and the Red Wings were in town. Chris Chelios also played for the Red Wings. And then at the end of all that, so Dennis Rodman was here. Eddie, what's the lead singer, Pearl Jam?
Vedder.
Eddie Vedder, thank you, was here. A bunch of celebrities. Chelios has made a lot of money. He's known a bunch of celebrities. I've actually met him multiple times. Super nice guy. But my point is, after both of those crazy celebrations for both Chris Chelios and Patrick Kane gets a pass from DeBrincat, who's also a former Blackhawk, in overtime, and Patrick Kane scores the overtime winner at the United Center on his first game back. So it was all over SportsCenter last night. I mean, amazing night for hockey in Chicago. But to your question, good sale or bad sale. So this is the same division as the Golden Knights, right? Like
yeah, I believe I just saw that they had the highest odds to win the division.
the highest odds to win the division.
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess maybe that's not including some teams that have been eliminated, but yeah, same division as the Golden Knights, but the Knights were like 14-1 to win the division.
Huh. Yeah. Okay. That's weird. I was gonna say I thought they would still have a shot, so maybe I'm missing something. But yeah, I mean the Canucks, Vancouver. We've talked about this a bunch on this podcast. Like, it's awesome when Canada's good at hockey. So like, I'm super happy for Vancouver that they actually have a good team. So Vancouver's minus 270, like you said. Edmonton's plus 370. That's second place in the Pacific. So yeah, I mean, great pickup by the buyer. Obviously, the seller got cold feet. He trying to get something back for his money. But to me, I probably would have held on to it looking at those odds. I thought the Golden Knights would have had a shot here, but yeah, at 14-1, they're basically out.
Yeah, I believe at the time the Canucks had lost 3 in a row. And in one of those games, I believe it was the backup goalie, but one of those games, they surrendered 10 goals in one of those losses. So just to your point about the cold feet, I'm a 3-game losing streak, and you've got a chance to profit 3K. I could see how we got a little cold feet, but yeah, since then, it seems like the Canucks have turned around.
Yeah.
Now again, as we know, yeah.
Just to wrap it up, they are 11 points back. Golden Knights are 11 points back. So that's why, and they've played 2 less games than Canucks. So figure they're like, if they win both of those, they're just 7 points back, but pretty big gap. Yeah.
But as we've learned, winning the division does not guarantee you anything in the playoffs. So, well, yeah, it is cool to see Canadian teams be good in the NHL. Just because they win the division does not mean that will translate necessarily to Stanley Cup playoff success. Moving on, going to talk a little NBA MVP. This was an interesting sale that occurred over the weekend. In early November, a customer used a $100 bonus bet on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to win MVP at 18-1 odds. Last week, he sold it for $500. Those are odds of plus 261 for the buyer. SGA is currently the second favorite behind Jokic. SGA is plus 220 odds at the sports book. So again, another good pickup for the buyer comparative to the market. And then also just kind of a cool thing that the seller was able to sell a ticket using a bonus bet because sports books do not offer cash outs on bonus bets, and even if you don't use a bonus bet, it's still sometimes rare for futures, sports books do not always offer cash out. So pure profit from the seller's perspective. And then, like I said, better than every sports book in the country on the for the buyer. So, the Thunder, interesting, super young team. I could see them doing really well, getting the number 1 seed in the West, maybe number 2, having a better record than the Nuggets. But Jokic is definitely the favorite right now for MVP. But it will be interesting to see if down the stretch the Nuggets decide to rest Jokic or rest Murray, which then hurts their win-loss record. And we'll see if that kind of plays into the minds of voters, because you could tell the Nuggets do not care as much about seeding as other teams like the Thunder do. And then just while we're talking about the Thunder, I thought I would mention that on our last podcast, I talked about Jalen Williams being 100-1 to win Most Improved Player. He is now 14-1 at Caesars and 19-1 at FanDuel. So I'm just going to take a quick early victory lap on that one.
I don't think it's early. That's a 6x return if you timed it properly. Buy him at 100-1 and sell him at 14-1. I don't think that's early. That's a great sale.
Yeah. So still a ways to go to get like really in the conversation. He's still, I think, like 4th on the odds board, but yeah, I'm kind of proud about that pick, and I would not. This will not be my stake or swap pick, but yeah, I would definitely take that 5x return right now if I had that 100-1 ticket. And then lastly, talking about sales, this was a super interesting parlay that sold. In late December, a customer placed a 5-leg parlay on the following: Georgia to win the Orange Bowl, which was not a question that was they were like minus 650, but Georgia to win the Orange Bowl, the Browns, Bills, and Saints to win their Week 17 games, and then the last leg is North Carolina to win the college basketball championship. So for the first 5 legs have won. The customer bet $60 to win $10,000. And then last week, he sold the ticket on PropSwap for $479. That's a nearly 7x return for the seller and odds of 20-1 for the buyer on North Carolina, who is currently sitting as a 2 seed in the bracketology according to Joe Lunardi. And as we record this, the look like they are going to win against Miami. But any thoughts on that sale?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that is the perfect sell now, take half your proceeds, and then just go rebet North Carolina. So if you took 250 of that, took North Carolina 20-1, you got another $5,000 ticket in your pocket. So
right.
that is the perfect sell on PropSwap, take some proceeds. We are far away. I like North Carolina. I do not think they win it all this year. Yeah, I would definitely sell that, put 250 or even a little bit less if you don't like North Carolina as much anymore. And then get another ticket for 5 Gs on Tar Heels.
Yeah, and for the buyer, he still has a ton of room to resell at a later point in time. You know, every time I think about North Carolina basketball now, I think of them setting the PropSwap record for most number of sales for a single ticket. So a couple years ago, when they lost to Kansas in the championship, one single North Carolina futures ticket sold 6 different times, which at the time was a record for PropSwap. And so again, the buyer paid $479 on a ticket that collects 10 grand. He's got a ton of upside sitting there, come tournament time. So super cool sale. And yeah, to your point, I would absolutely take some of those proceeds and rebet them. So speaking of upside, it's time to get into a little stake or swap. First up, we will be talking about TCU, currently 125-1 odds at MGM to win the national title. Luke, we will start with you first. Are you staking or swapping TCU?
Yeah, I am going to stake TCU at 125-1 at MGM. They are 90-1 at DraftKings. So value right there. But honestly, this is a story about the Big 12. I think this is the best conference top to bottom by a landslide in the college basketball world this year. So give me a team that's a contender. You get triple digit odds on them. Love the head coach. I think they still have that Eddie Lampkin guy. Don't quote me on that, but I've just been watching a ton of Big 12 basketball this year because it's always on in the mornings in Chicago. So yeah, Big 12 is loaded, triple digits on a team that's always a contender. I think this team can maybe get to the Sweet 16, and if you're pushing it the Elite 8, so you're flipping it for if they get down to the Elite 8, let's say 10-1 odds, you're making 12 extra money, or they get to the Sweet 16, their odds are 20-1, you're making 6 extra money. So yeah, that's my pick.
So I mean, I'm going to swap TCU, but I realize that 125-1 odds, like, that's not necessarily selling high, but my stance is just kind of hold off on TCU. And I'll kind of explain that a little further in the next team we talk about. But according to Joe Lunardi right now, who's pretty accurate on seedings, but, obviously it can change. There's still time to change, and regions, they could be a correct seed number, but different region. But according to Joe Lunardi's bracket right now, he has TCU as the 9 seed and would be playing Florida Atlantic as the 8 seed in round 1. And then they would play UConn in round 2. And so where I'm going with this is just like, in terms of these like super long shots, which I think once the bracket gets set, like that's where I'm going to start. I would hone in on these triple digit long shots. But like, if without knowing the bracket and where they sit, like you could end up being like, oh man, like my team is playing another team that I really like, and you kind of want to see that bracket to strategize a little bit. And so, if I was holding a TCU ticket and that bracket, like I just laid out, was occurring, I would not feel great. You got to beat FAU and then UConn. Like that's a tough road. And if the bracket was sit like that, in a month from now, I bet you they would be higher than 125 to 1, right? So that's why I would swap TCU right now.
Totally agree. If that's the draw, you got a big problem. If it's FAU and then UConn,
But obviously, it could go out the other way too, right? Where they do really well the Big 12 tournament, and now they end up being a 6 seed instead of a 9 seed. So, obviously things can happen, but that that makes me pause right there to see that gauntlet in the first weekend. The next team we are going to talk about is Marquette, currently 30 to 1 to win the national title at Caesars. I will go first. I am staking Marquette. The 30 to 1 at Caesars is compared to 20 to 1 at FanDuel and 22 to 1 at DraftKings. So there's some nice value there. They are currently a 2 seed in the Midwest region, according to Joe Lunardi. Yes, they lost by a ton at UConn the other week, but after that game, they beat DePaul and Xavier by combined 58 points. So, UConn's really good, and they played at UConn. They play the Huskies again coming up later this season at home. I think I would look out for Marquette in that game at home. They have the 12th best defense and 25th best offense, according to KenPom. So they're like right on the border of that top 20 rule that I talked about last year, and I'll talk about again as we get closer. But basically, it's you can pretty much get, it's almost a guarantee that the champion will be top 20 in both offense and defensive rating in those KenPom rankings. Marquette's starting 5 are all upperclassmen, seniors and juniors, and just like I mentioned about TCU, I'm always a little hesitant at this stage to take a huge long shot because the seed numbers can change so much. But Marquette seems pretty firm right now as a 2 or a 3 seed, just given their record, their rankings in the AP poll. And so, again, things can change, but I would be shocked if they did not end up as a 3 seed or better at this point. So for those reasons, I am staking Marquette at 30 to 1.
I like it. I also will stake Shaka Smart. 3 fun facts about Shaka Smart that I looked up while preparing for this episode from Wisconsin. So that's cool. Marquette is, of course, in Milwaukee. He graduated from he got his master's from the California University of Pennsylvania. If that's not the most confusing name for a college in the world, I'm not sure what is. The California University of Pennsylvania is in Pennsylvania, but wow, what a name for a college to get your master's at. And then secondly, kind of, I guess, third fun factor, enrollment of Marquette, 11,000. I was expecting like 40. I thought that's like my high school had like 3,000. So much smaller than I thought. For a basketball program that's relevant, seems like every year they've been good. Of course, Dwayne Wade kind of started that ascension. But anyways, I like 30 to 1. I do like Marquette this year. I like Shaka Smart. I'm still waiting for him to get over the hump, so I'm a little bit concerned. I'd probably be selling this if they get to the Final Four. I don't necessarily trust him to cut down the nets or to win the national championship this year. So. Keep an eye out for that. I do think he's not in the top echelon of coaches just yet, but 30 to 1, like you said, relative to 20 to 1 value immediately.
Yeah, I mean, look, coach is obviously super important, and that kind of goes back to my upperclassman thing, right? Like, it's rare to have so many upperclassmen, I think, in your starting 5. And so, the coach matters, but also, you want guys out there who have experience and have been in the tournament before. So, 30 to 1 Marquette, mark it down. But that will do it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to subscribe, leave a rating, and we will talk to you next week.